And in fact, let me go ahead and share the links to this. I apologize for not getting this out to everyone earlier. Some of this is still a work in progress, and I know how useful that is. However, this entire workshop is going to be, today's going to be more code along hands-on. Tomorrow will be more sort of group independent work and review. So I think we should be in a good spot with this stuff. And if someone could do me a favor and just repost what I'm putting in Zoom into Slack as well, I'd really appreciate it. If we want, I can move these into the main curriculum repo. At the moment, they're separate. And if someone can just make sure that they can see the repos as well, and that there's not a permissions issue, that would be awesome. So really the only things that you all have to do to get set up, there's nothing you have to clone. Hopefully you all installed, we're not going to use it a ton, but it's really useful, this Git graph VS Code plugin. If you haven't installed that now, please go ahead and do that. And Clarice, thanks for the heads up on that assignment link. I'll just go ahead and make that public for the time being. And I know that was, there's some wonkiness with our setup there, so I appreciate it. And let's get this knocked out. While I am doing this, actually the one bit of setup is I would like everyone to create a new repo on your own GitHub, because we are going to be writing some code and pushing it to a repo and doing some work with that. And let's see here. Let me actually stop share for a second while I make sure I get this sorted. So if you haven't, please make a brand new repo in GitHub. It can have an empty README or whatever you want. You can name it Git Workshop if you want. We're going to do a little bit of coding for really a really simple version of the school app that we've seen using Flask. We're not going to add a database or anything like that. We might get into a little front end stuff, time permitting. I think the repo should be public now. Clarice, are you able to access it now?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. So like I was saying, if you haven't, please go to your GitHub and go to repositories and just hit new. And we're just going to call this Git Workshop. And feel free to add a README file and create it. And this is a good time to start coding along, just to get a little setup going. And then once we kind of are all here, I'll kind of walk through the plan.
Hey, Adam, could you share your screen one more time, please?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I was just walking through the workflow of creating a Git repo, which you all have done, but just go ahead and do this. Just make sure it's on your own GitHub account. Name it Git Workshop or whatever you want. You can give it a README, and let's go ahead and clone it with the method that works best for you for cloning. And let me move that VS Code over there. And you know, go ahead, open up VS Code or whatever terminal you like. Go to whatever directory you like to put your projects in. And let's go ahead and clone the repo that we just created. And what I am going to do, and it's not super critical, but I want to, with VS Code, I want to make sure that I open that specific directory. So that then when we use this Git graph plugin, it will find it. So for me, that's in my code directory, and then hiding way down the list is Git workshop. And so now I should have an empty README. I should be able to type git status. And actually, this is a great chance to test out the Git graph plugin and make sure that it's working and installed. And if you do Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P to open up the VS Code command palette, that'll open up here. And I've been using Git graph a lot recently, so it's at the top. But you'll want to type git graph just view. And there should be nothing here, right? This is just that one commit. But this is a great visualization tool. We're not going crazy deep into branching today, but this will help us along the way. And let me just pause here and see if there's any questions and give folks a chance to get set up and oriented and everything.
How did you open Git graph again?
Oh yeah, totally. So VS Code has what's called the command palette. On a Mac, it's going to be Command-Shift-P. On Windows, I believe it's Control-Shift-P. And you can do all sorts of awesome stuff from here. Like all of our extensions, Thunder client. If I was editing a file, I can format it. And once we install that Git graph extension, if I just start typing it, I have a view Git graph there. If someone isn't sure if that extension is installed or not, I would just go to extensions and search for Git graph. And it should be this first one that pops up that's got the 6 million downloads. And installing should be pretty quick. You just click install. I don't think you'll have to restart VS Code. And then you should be able to use the command palette. Is that working for you now, Clarice?
Well, I have a different question now. So if I have my personal project open, how can I tell Git graph to don't look at that, look at this empty repo?
Oh, I would recommend having like more than one VS Code window. I have another VS Code window that at the moment you guys can't see, but that has like I've opened this to another directory with like the actual workshop. So if you don't want to like lose what you have set up in VS Code, I would just open two separate windows, and then that way Git graph just looks at, so VS Code calls it a workspace. I haven't dug super deep into it, but basically when we do open and choose a directory, VS Code like sets that as, the project root directory, the workspace root directory. And if VS Code and Git graph find a .git directory in that workspace root or project root, that's what it'll use. That's also how VS Code, like if you have like a Python virtual environment directory name .venv in the workspace root, it kind of finds it for us. Yeah, I hope that helps. And how are folks doing? Is everyone able to kind of open this up and get a Git graph opening for our brand new empty repo?
I guess, Adam, so what did you do when you just when you search for the Git graph in the command palette?
Yeah. Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P. Which by the way is probably, it's maybe the most useful VS Code command, to be honest. And you can type whatever you want in here, new, you get new file. I've installed the TL draw extension. So it's a really slick, it has really slick search behavior. So pretty much whatever kind of extensions and stuff you've got installed, you can use. So like if I just start typing git graph, I can use the arrow keys. If I want, I can use Control N and Control P, which is like old Emacs key bindings to go up and down, and view git graph. Does that help, Halsey?
I guess all I'm seeing is, oh, so Command Shift P. Yeah, just a second, sorry. I don't know why it just went to different. So Command Shift P. And just type in git graph.
That should do it, yes.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Perfect. It's like view, I think it's called like view graph.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank-
And honestly, this is a great chance to get start getting more familiar with Command Shift P as well, which I think is super useful, especially kind of starting to move into the group project. Okay, awesome. So we'll be coming back to that. There's not a lot here that's interesting, right? If we had branches, we could look at them and stuff. And that's what we're about to do. So the plan for today, as I said, is we really are going to focus on like some workflows and techniques. In particular, I've kind of put together a list of scenarios that I know I've encountered just countless times doing work, and I know from working with all of you and previous classes come up a lot. So we're going to look at kind of how to handle each of these scenarios in Git and do it safely, because you know, so much of programming we can really do a whole lot and move fast, and the consequences are not that dire, and Git helps with that. Like once we've committed code, it's pretty much saved, you know, and changing stuff is pretty quick. There are some Git commands, as I know many of you have discovered, where using the wrong command in the wrong way at the wrong time can cause a lot of pain and frustration, and like hours of your life can get lost to that. Whether because the code is lost or because now like your branch is in a really confused state. And that's part of the learning curve, and that's part of the learning curve of group projects, but that's what this is for, to help with some of those things. I've laid out some of this. If we can, I'd love to get a bit farther than what I was able to lay out, but we're going to build a really simple Flask app. And I'll show the code for that in a minute. And in fact, this is the only time I'm going to encourage folks to just copy and paste code, because today is not about the code at all. And I've got all that code in a repo. And we're going to look specifically at the scenario of I've committed code that I don't want, because I know this is a really common scenario and where people run into trouble. And we're going to look at this command git reset and git restore, how to use them safely for a couple different cases, and dig a little under the hood into what's happening with Git. And then if we have time, there's a couple other cool things I'd like to show folks. So again, this will be code along, and you absolutely should be copying code just to kind of map out the plan. We're going to look at Git restore, Git reset. I'm going to talk a little bit about Git log and Git diff. We're going to talk a little bit about commit hashes and what's called a ref. This special term head, that's a ref in GIF. A little bit of the basics of Git. You know, we've talked about, you know, you add stuff and you commit it, and there's the working directory, and there's this term, the 3 trees, to talk about those things. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And really here are the scenarios that we're going to get through. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to 3. We might, and we might be able to get even further, which would be awesome. But my goal is really to show some useful workflows, because these are really common. And once you all start doing group project work, it'll get more and more common. So I've added some code and I haven't committed it yet. And I actually don't want to commit that code. How can I safely like add that code? I've committed some code, but I haven't pushed it yet. How can I safely deal with that? I've committed and pushed code that I don't want, what do I do now? And what do I have to be careful when I'm starting to work in a team where it's not just me like doing work and other people might be using this branch and stuff like that. And if we can get farther, we totally will. And this other link, if you all look over here in GitHub, and I also will, I think, explore a little bit of GitHub's features. If we switch to this other branch called initial setup, and this is what we're going to build, just to give you all a preview so that we can be oriented. The README we're going to leave pretty empty. If there's time, we'll add a front end directory like we've seen for our full stack architecture. The back end is extremely simple. I've added a little README. There's a requirements.txt. If you poke around in here, basically Flask cores, and python.env. And then the code itself is also pretty straightforward. And again, I will be copying and pasting code, and all of you should as well for this, because that's not the goal. And is the font size okay on this? Because I think I'll just quickly walk through this application to make sure that we all kind of feel good about it, and then dive into working with Git. Cool. So not right away, but we're going to use the python.env library that we've used many times. GitHub has some fancy stuff now, but I don't want to use that yet. We're not going to use a database at all. We're going to kind of build out the school app that we've seen many different times. I wrote an incredibly simple student class. All it does is take a Python dictionary, and GitHub really wants to help me with the symbols reference, which is really cool, but not what I want. A dictionary that's going to have an ID and a name. I'm just going to have a list of all students and just manually creating some students with a little bit of a Harry Potter theme, right? Harry Potter, Hermione, and Ron. And I know we haven't looked at Flask in a bit, and I hope actually coming back to this shows kind of how far we've gone. We're just going to make a route that's really simple for our base route that just returns a message ping. So we know stuff is working. And this students route is going to return a list of all the students, which again is going to be really straightforward because we've got this hard-coded list and we are just looping through it and returning it as JSON. We're going to see in a little bit adding this little bit of logic when we add the python.env with like a .env file so that we can tell our program if it's in the development or production environment and if debug should be on or off. Before we kind of dive into the Git stuff, do folks have any kind of questions about the code? And all this code is in that other workshop repo in the lesson too, so that's going to be the most useful guide. Is everyone? Yeah, what's on people's minds?
Sorry, could you go over where this code is located again?
Yeah, so there should be 2 links in the Zoom chat, and if someone could please repost them to Slack, that would be great. This assignment one is where we're gonna end up. The work isn't on the main branch, it's on a branch called initial setup. But if you all hop over to the other repo link that I shared, and I know this one isn't in the curriculum repo, but it's in that org. This is kind of what we'll follow, and there's a guide that we can follow to move along. And if you kind of scroll down here, and this is going to be our focus here on I've committed code I don't want, how can we use like git reset and restore? And this is what we'll be going through. And all that code in that assignment repo is in here. So I would actually just use this and copy and paste the code. And the plan is like we are going to very deliberately be committing stuff that we don't want to commit so we can practice undoing it. Does that help?
Yes, sorry.
Awesome. No, great question. I appreciate it. And I know I got this out a bit at the last minute. And in fact, what I'll go ahead and do is I think I'll put that off to the right and I'll have my code off to the left here because I know that's been useful because I know that all of you have to do some screen juggling at times. So just at any point, if you know the font size on something needs to be bigger or smaller or anything like that, please just let me know. So let's dig into this. Kind of like it says over here, the git reset command is really powerful. We can use it to undo commits. There's also the git restore command that I'm sure many of you are familiar with for undoing stuff that we've added, right? And just to kind of very quickly recap sort of git concepts. And I think what I'll do is I'll use this as sort of a visual aid. In VS Code, we really encourage you all to use the command line. VS Code does have this source control tab right here. And this does let you see like the state of your Git repo as a whole. For instance, if I create a file with this command touch foo.py, and if I type git status, right, this file is untracked by Git. I can do whatever I want to it. All of this untracked work, untracked files, stuff that's not added, I believe it's called the working directory is the term. You know, and we could put whatever we want, you know, in this file. And just do a print statement or what have you. And if I type git status, again, this is untracked, right? If I type git add, I can see, well, now I've added this. This is also called staging. People will call this the staging directory, the staging area. I think the formal term is the index. And whenever we add stuff, Git keeps track of it in a separate place. And if I type git status, I can see this as well. And as many of you have seen, I could go ahead and I could add more to that file. And now Git keeps track of different changes within the same file. And if I type git status, what I see is Git has staged, we've added to the index this file foo.py and our first change. But we then made further changes and we haven't added those yet. And that's living here in what's called the working directory. And then I'm going to talk about this tool a bit later, but there's a tool called git diff that will show the difference between different commits that you've made or the difference between the code that we've added and the code that we haven't. And if I type git diff here, I can see this one line in red and this one line in green that shows me the difference between what's in the working directory, what's staged, what's in the working directory and what's been staged or what's in the index. So I just want to pause and check in here and see if folks have any questions. I know you'll all have been using Git a lot, but that parts of it are, you know, frankly, not always intuitive and take a little while to wrap your head around. Josh, yes, sir.
So you touched a foo.py and then you have print hello. You added it, and then what else did you do?
Right. I added it exactly. And then I changed something in the file. Because the first in fact, can everyone see this command line stuff okay, or should I bump the font size up a bit? Cool. So you can in fact see kind of the difference here. this stuff in red is what I added, that print hello. Then I changed the file again and made changes in what Git calls the working directory. And that's what we see in the editor, right? Then that's what's like in the directory, like Git stores stuff when we commit it somewhere else inside its own little directory in the file system. And this green line here shows really the difference is that I, added world to my hello message, but I haven't, and excuse my language, I shouldn't have said added hello world to the hello message. I should have said modified. I changed this file again, but I haven't added those changes. Those changes are not staged to the index. And we'll do that in just a moment. And in fact, I can use this tool to see the difference. If I click on foo.py under staged changes, it says print hello. If I go over here, it shows me the difference, or what we'll often refer to as the diff for short. And VS Code has in fact opened this other little editor window over here to do that. And so I could close that out. I can do this. And you can in fact do all the Git commands you've learned this way. I know plenty of really capable software engineers who have amazing careers who are not command line wizards and prefer using a tool like this. We really encourage you all to use the command line, because I think a basic kind of fundamental comfort with command line is important. But as you get into your career, you're going to be figuring out the tools that help you be productive. And most companies, let devs set up their own environments. Like, it's more so about whatever workflow and tools work best for you. What else is on people's minds? Or other questions that folks might have? Cool. And if I do Git graph, I don't think we're going to see much very interesting, right? Because this shows us the commits on this branch. And other than that first commit that sort of GitHub did for us when we created our brand new repo, we haven't committed anything yet, right? It tells me that I've got uncommitted changes and I can look at it and do all this stuff if I want, but nothing has actually been committed. I'm going to go ahead and delete this file and then kind of move into the rest of this, but I wanted to kind of walk through this to help kind of like refresh and recharge us as we dive in. And in fact, we can see now if I delete this file, in fact, I can't totally delete the file. And this is actually something that is a very nice feature of Git. When we've added something to the staging directory or the index, Git does do some work to protect it for us. And if I type Git status here, I see changes to be committed and changes not staged for commit. And what's not staged is that foo.py is deleted. And if I go over here, this hello message is still there. And if I did, I'm not going to run this command, but if I did do, a commit message, I believe we'd have foo.py that says hello. And actually what we're going to learn, and really most of this workshop is about, is how to unstage this command that we just added. And there's a whole lot of preamble around it, because with Git, when you start messing with stuff, you might spend 20 minutes making sure you understand what one command is doing, but that is 20 minutes well spent. And honestly, I will re-Google and reread about things all the time, because a lot of, frankly, Git's user interface and how it describes things is not intuitive, and it's very easy to make a mistake. And Git tells us how we can unstage this file right here with git restore staged. And this is in fact what we're going to do with some code. And just to demonstrate it right now, git restore staged foo.py. git status, and now all of that is gone. I already deleted the file. We unstaged what foo.py and that first hello change from the staging directory or the index, and now it's totally gone. So I just want to pause here and see if folks have any questions about anything, because that's really what today's about. Cool. So we kind
Yeah,
of,
Adam,
yeah,
real quick, sorry to cut you off.
absolutely. No,
Could you go over like the git remote dash v, like making sure that we're gonna be committing this to the proper location? And
Yeah.
like setting the origin URL?
yeah, totally. A couple, I honestly never can remember those commands by memory. So let's see, git remote. So remote is the term for another Git repo somewhere else. We have a local repo on our own computers, and our remote is in GitHub. Origin is the term for a special remote that's sort of like the hub. There's a lot of different ways to kind of use Git remotes. So GitHub is our remote origin repo. And the git remote command, if I do -- help, it gives you all this information. And like with many command line commands, -v is short for verbose, which means it gives you more information. And kind of like you were saying, the information that it gives us is the name of the remote, which is origin, and the URL for it. This URL will be different things depending on if when you cloned, you chose the option to use SSH or HTTPS or GitHub's own little GitHub command line utility, which is pretty nifty. I've just been using SSH since forever. So that's what I'm used to. And that's why this URL does not have like an HTTP or anything in front of that, because it's a different kind of URL. And it's this git at github.com. If you had cloned using HTTPS, and let me show you all what I mean by that. If I go to github.com and I go to my repo, and let's say I make a new repo. Don't worry about doing this right now. This is just to demo. In fact, I don't even need to make a new repo. We'll just go to any existing repo right over here where you do clone and these options, and then the URL that you have, you can see that the URL is different depending on like your authentication strategy. So kind of great question about Git remote. I know for the daily assignments, we've had you changing the remote to practice and flex these skills. In the workplace, every single job I've ever been at, you just cloned the repo and then you were pretty much good to go. Once you clone a repo, as you can see, Git sets up that remote for us, and then we send the code back to that repo. I know forking repos gets used, I think, more for open source projects, because for companies, there's one repo and we all work on different branches, and there are strategies for managing like who does work on what branch. But that's a lot of the value of Git, is everyone working off of one repo, so it's pretty common to clone it. So for today and for the group project, I don't think you all will have to mess with the Git remote. Does that help?
Yep, thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah, great question. What else is on people's minds? Cool. Let's dive in and write some code. And in fact, we kind of got a great preview of a lot of this because we just solved this scenario, right? Of restore staged. And really the difference here is I think the code along will be helpful because it's going to be like a much more real world example of when this happens, and just little tips about extra safety steps we can do because it's so easy to get these commands wrong. You know, git reset and git restore. There's not a lot of difference between those commands, and they do different things, and it's just really easy to screw up. So we're going to build this school API. Again, I would encourage you all to just copy and paste these commands because writing code is not the goal of today. And we're gonna want to create a virtual environment. And it doesn't really matter if we select it or not to the workspace folder. And we're going to want to install Flask and Flask cores. And actually, I apologize. What we really should do is source then bin activate first. And let me throw this command in the Zoom chat as that one's not, and I know the repo. So we need to activate it. And now let's do our install so that it gets installed there. And now let's use pip freeze to create a requirements.txt. And we're not going to commit anything yet. And please don't like add or commit code until I'm doing it. Because that's the goal of the exercise today. We already have a README, but let's create front end and back end directories. Because eventually we're going to build our front end, our back end, and let's navigate into the back. And again, feel more than free to be copying and pasting code if it's useful. And in fact, I'm about to start doing that right now. I'm going to create this app.py directory or app.py file in my backend directory. So now I'm in the backend directory of my repo and I've got an empty file named app.py. And as I said, I am just going to copy this whole thing in and please go ahead and do the same and I'll give everyone a minute to do that.
Adam, I'm so sorry, but could you show me again just which file you're working off of? I'm just a little bit lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend just using, I'll just throw this link right in the Zoom chat. I would just recommend working off of this. I think that's probably the easiest. In the assignment repo, I have this there. Also app.py is the only file that we're creating for a good portion of this workshop. So it's really, well, that's not entirely true. There's requirements txt and a .env file, but there's not going to be really much else. The assignments repo, the work is on a different branch because I want us to get a chance to look at doing some PRs and maybe merging. So that might be a potential source of confusion for folks looking at the assignment repo. So yeah, I would go ahead, like copy and paste this in. And in fact, I'm just gonna do Python app.py. I just want to make sure it runs. I listed, we can, if you put the endpoints that we created in your browser, those should work. However, to be totally honest, for today's exercise, even if they aren't working, it's not critical. I think as long as you have it running, then you're good to go.
Adam, when you created your virtual environment, did that stay, did it add a bunch of changes to your Git graph?
It did. And in fact,
Okay.
I do apologize. I actually wanted to create the virtual environment directory in the back end. That's going to be part of what we're going to do. We're going to add the virtual environment directory. So actually, I apologize for that misstep. I would say let's just move requirements.txt into the backend directory. If your virtual environment isn't in that backend directory, just delete it. Go into the backend directory and let's create it again. you'll probably want to run, we need to run deactivate, and now let's activate the new virtual environment. That's in the back end. And let's do pip install -r requirements.txt. There's a couple paths to get there, and the doc actually should walk through doing that. But basically make sure that the virtual environment directory is in the back end, and I'll put the commands I just ran in the Zoom chat as well. If that's helpful.
Adam, does it
Yeah, what's up?
not work? Does it not work if you just move the virtual environment into the back end?
I think that probably does work. I was wondering about just doing that, and that might have been easier. I'm pretty darn sure that works. I was like, I'm like 90 something% sure. I just wasn't quite 100%, which is why I deleted it. But yeah, I think it will work. And actually, if you have that working, that's by far the easier way to go. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Chris. And once you have this set up, if you do ls-a in the backend directory, we should see the virtual environment at py requirements txt. Go ahead and make a readme in the backend directory as well. Can I kind of scroll down and move on from this sample code here? Cool. Just grab what I have here, or just put hello in the README if you want. It's not important what we have in the README at the moment. We're not going to do major modifications to it. I just want to put something in there. And we haven't added anything to Git yet. We haven't actually done any Git commands, and that's intentional. So I'll give folks a minute or so to kind of do all the steps. Where we want to end up is, again, my backend directory has the virtual environment directory, a readme, app.py, and requirements.txt. And if I run app.py, it runs. And let me just pause and see if folks have any questions.
Yeah, Adam, the directory you're working in, this is the one that is connected with your repo, right?
Correct. It is
Yeah.
inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why can't I see that? Why don't I see the Git next to your file name?
Which file?
You know, the Git tag that tells you that you're working in a Git in a file that's connected to a Git repository.
Oh, up here in the VS Code tabs, you mean?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I honestly don't know. I don't pay a lot of attention to those. It might be because I haven't added any of these. If I go here to this source control menu option in the sidebar, which is VS Code's sort of like built-in visual tool to help with Git, this tells me that I'm in the repo and I have a whole bunch of work I've done, but we haven't added any of it yet. I haven't done git add. And whenever we're doing work that we haven't added yet, it lives in what Git calls the working tree or the working directory. And the term tree here is just because like the file system is a tree. Like it's a little sort of tree structure. It's nothing fancy, and that, so there's nothing crazy going on here. But that's just where the term comes from. So right now, Git knows all this stuff exists and it's kind of in the working directory. And those are kind of like the three places where Git stores stuff. And in fact, if we kind of do this Google search for three trees, we're going to be able to find a couple. There's a lot of nifty images. This one is not a bad one, and we're gonna dig into this, and I think this tool helps visualize it of the working directory, the staging directory or index, and our commits. And right now, under changes, I can see in the working directory, I have all this code that I've written, but we haven't added it, we haven't staged it, and we haven't committed anything. I don't know for sure, but that might be why the symbol isn't up there for the editor windows.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. What other questions do folks have?
Did you already do something with the ENV stuff?
I've done nothing other than the Python virtual environment.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna add the python.env in a little bit as another feature and see another scenario of unstaging or really uncommitting code without losing it. And we're gonna do that in a little bit. Awesome. So we've got all this stuff. Again, just to reiterate, you should have a backend directory. And inside of that, the Python virtual environment, app.py readme requirements.txt. Let's just go ahead and do git add. We can do it here in the backend directory. And now I've added everything. I don't have a git ignore or anything like that. So we've added the virtual environment, and that's our mistake that we're going to see how to undo. Because I think, and this is an example of, it could be anything when you're working on code, right? But this is like one common thing that I know like is an easy gotcha for me. And now all of a sudden, if I go over to this source control sidebar in VS Code, there's nothing here under changes in the working directory. It's all here under staged changes. It all got moved. And to go back to this kind of simple diagram of the three trees or the three places our code can be in Git, this bottom one, the working directory, well, we ran git add and it's now all staged. So you'll hear this referred to as like the staging directory or the index or the staging area. Do folks have any questions? Cool. So this is a really common error to make, right? It happens all the time, not just with virtual environments. So anytime that you have added code that you don't want to commit, this is what we can do. And if I type git status, I get this huge message because the entire virtual environment directory is there. We already got a preview of this. We used git restore staged. But the two things that I'm going to just very briefly mention, I'm going to make this a bit bigger to go ahead and do this, is so just like we did git add dot, you all have probably seen that you can also add a specific file. You may or may not have seen that you can use these sort of wildcard patterns on the command line to tell Git to add all the Python files or all the JavaScript files. And so restore staged, restore staged changes. This is a safe operation. It does not delete anything. It just moves stuff from the stage changes back to our working directory, back to the changes. And just like with git add, we can tell it to do this for everything. If we had a bunch of Python files, we could tell it to do it for all the Python files. Or we can tell it to do it for a specific directory or file. And in this case, and I'm not going to run the command yet, we want to do this for a specific directory, the one that we want to move back. And can someone maybe say, like, what's the advantage of doing it that way instead of just the dot? Why is this safer? it's not a trick question, and in some ways I know it's a little bit of maybe like a too straightforward question. And the answer really simply is, you know, if I'm coding and it's 9 at night, there's not a big difference when I'm looking at this visually between git reset dash f soft, and I'm not sure if that would delete something or not actually with the stage stuff, and git restore staged. It's just incredibly easy to get these commands wrong. Incredibly easy. So, you know, like I said, a lot of the time when we're coding, like we're kind of in a flow, we're in the zone, and undoing stuff is pretty easy. With Git and like once you like down the line when you all are working in your first job and you'll get to touch like code in a production environment with servers and stuff. There are certain times when we kind of need to switch from that mode to the very careful mode. And this is where I've been doing this since forever, but I'm not writing a ton of code every day and doing tons of git commits and pushes, and I'm rusty. So if I am doing work, I almost always Google or use ChatGPT to confirm that I'm using the correct command with this stuff, because it just pays. So the more specific we can be, the better. And actually it's not a bad habit to get into with Git. So here's another question. Again, not really a trick question, but maybe a little too simple. Let's say that, you know, we had some really important code here. You know, the group project is due tomorrow, and this is a really important feature, or I'm working on something at work. Like I would really love a backup, right? Because what if even doing this, what if I do get something wrong and lose all this code? There's a ridiculously simple way to back up really important code in this situation. And this is a little bit of a trick question, so I apologize, but does anyone have any thoughts as to what that might be?
Git backup.
I wish.
Just
Git-
copy a folder.
Yeah, just copy it to a folder. So I can just, you know, make their backup and move my stuff into there. Does that sound right? Almost. There's one wrinkle here. Once we've committed code to Git, Git is amazing. You have to go out of your way to destroy, to do something destructive to committed code. Code that isn't committed, we get less guarantees from Git. This backup directory is still inside the Git repo, and I have code here that's not committed. So if I really want to save this code, I actually just want to copy it into a file somewhere or a directory that's not inside the Git repo. And I'll have scratch directories all the time. I'll just open up some other text editor and or another VS Code window or whatever it is and paste it in and save it as scratch. And I might make a scratch directory. And if I have a bunch of code, I would put it there. But it's actually not the worst idea. It might sound a little silly, but if it's code that you care about, that is a really nice thing to have, right? And sort of the moral of the story here, though, is if the code isn't committed in Git yet, it's not really kind of like safely protected inside the repo. So if we want to back it up, we should make a copy of it somewhere outside the repo. Again, nothing fancy at all, but very, very useful. Excuse me. So we'll get rid of that backup. So let's pretend that we've gone ahead and done that with the code that we really care about. And now we're ready to run this command. And let me go ahead and kind of bring back the guide code here. So I want to make sure I'm in the right spot and that there's nothing I missed. Yeah, we're gonna make a git ignore directory in a moment. Let's go ahead and unstage our code. Git restore staged.venv. And if I type git status, all my other changes are still staged and added and ready to be committed. And just that virtual environment directory has been unstaged. And over here in this source control sidebar, I can see that. Right, so again, this is like one simple scenario, but this one crops up a lot. So I think walking just through this workflow and each piece is really easy, because this is the kind of thing where, especially as you start working on branches more, kind of like making a wrong move can cause a lot of frustration and lost time. So now we can go ahead and commit this. Let's just create a git ignore directory first, so that we don't do this again. And let's actually add that git ignore directory, and let's use git add just to add that specific file. Excuse me, a git ignore file, not a directory. And now if I type git status, I see the git ignores there. I see the readmes there. I see the new files there. And note that that virtual environment directory is not showing up in untracked files or the working directory unstage changes now, because we added it to the git ignore. And we can put git ignore directories. We can have a whole bunch of them all over the repo wherever we want. So now let's go ahead and commit this. And we can just run commit -m, and we can say initial backend setup. And now if I type git status, I see that my local branch on my local repo is ahead of GitHub by 1 commit. And in a little bit, we'll run git push to put it up there. If I type git log, I see the history of my commits. And I'll jump to full screen for this. If I view the git graph, I now have these 2 commits here. And if I wanted to, and I do apologize, I think I forgot to hop to another branch, which is okay. So if I apologize about that. If anyone's on a different branch, like an initial setup branch, that's totally fine. If you're on the main branch, that's totally fine as well. And we can see this graph and we can see what's happening here. And then if I click on this code, I can kind of really look at the anatomy of a git commit. And there's some really interesting stuff here. And you can see all this on GitHub as well. Like in a little bit, I'll just show, like, you can look at individual commits. We have the commit hash here, which is a unique string that represents this commit. The parent is the hash of the previous commit, because Git sort of uses a linked list approach to link these commits together. You can see who wrote it. This comes from our Git global config settings on our computer. We see the commit message, Git stores the date, and we have a really nice visual interface that just shows all these changes. And this is what's called a diff, which is the change between this commit and the one before it. And since none of this code existed before, the diffs are pretty straightforward. This file did not exist. And on the left, you can see the previous commit, the parent commit. On the right, we see our commit. And the diff is we added all this stuff. And we can do that for all of these, and we'll get some more interesting diffs in a minute or two. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions or if there's things on people's minds.
I have a sort of question.
Yeah.
Can we just add, like, if we didn't do the command line thing, can you also just like take the file name and put it in git ignore, and that would work too?
Say that again about, if
Like,
we had done the git ignore first, you mean?
well, if you didn't like do all this in the terminal, could you just add the file name to git ignore? Would that also work?
I think so. If I understand your question, I'm not sure if the terminal is the key piece, but that might be, I might be misunderstanding a bit, and let me kind of talk through it a bit, and if I am, let me know. So with the like if we open up the git ignore. Oh, do you mean if we had just opened the file and edited it like this?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100%. I understand now. Yes. That command line command was just a little shorthand. Echo prints. This pipe sends whatever the output of the other command is to somewhere else. And if you send it to a file, the shell will create that file. So just sort of in the interests of like brevity and time, that was how I did it, but 100%, however we make the get ignore totally works. Yeah, good question. I something I wasn't sure if you were going in this direction, Clarice, but something we can also do is here in this kind of visual source control tool that VS Code gives us. We can do stuff like add code and stage it and unstage it, and you can like drag it around and do stuff to it. And again, there's a lot of value in getting comfortable on the command line, which is why we've been pushing you all in that direction. But as you start really, shifting from student to professional and developing your own workflow, if there are tools that make you more productive, I would say go for it. What else is on people's minds? Sean, we haven't gotten to adding any environment variables yet in app PY, which is probably why you're getting that error. My guess is maybe you implemented like a part of what's there and then a piece is missing. Where I'm at the moment, there's no environment variable stuff in here yet. What other questions do folks have?
Adam, quick question. So I did the get restored stage.venv and I'm getting a fatal could not resolve head warning. I'm not sure what I did.
Can you actually share your screen real quick and if we can resolve it in like a minute or two, we will. Otherwise, I'll probably have to circle back to it.
I actually got the same thing and I looked it up real quick and I did get reset.env and that worked.
Oh, what did you run, Anna?
I did get reset then the .venv.
Got it. Interesting. That very well may work. I would love to see your screen. Real quick, I think was that Chad? Yeah.
Yep.
Let's just confirm the state of your repo. Type git status for me real quick and hit enter.
But I just did the get reset as well, and it seemed like it may have worked, but get
Okay. So
that seemed to work.
okay, that's awesome. Unfortunately, I'm curious what issue you guys ran into. I don't think I'm able to kind of. Actually, if you can scroll up, maybe can we see the error that it printed out from before in the terminal?
Yep, so this was the error right here.
Okay.
Um,
And
I
if
was-
you scroll up a bit more, what does it say? Yeah, just till we get to the end of all this stuff. It's a lot of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. A quick Google search probably. I'm a little surprised that we ran into that because we haven't gotten that far. There's a small chance, depending on the version of Git you're using, that could be it. Git restore is technically an experimental feature of Git, but it's been around for a while and it's not going anywhere. and it's sort of becoming the recommended way. Before, you did have to use git reset and sort of do like an extra step, but I'm not sure what the issue is there. And Anna, thank you so much for sorting that out. And that does touch on a bit what I wanted to kind of talk about next a little bit, which actually is looking at git reset for our other scenarios. And just very quickly to talk about git reset, I'll just very briefly mention this and then see what else is on people's minds, and maybe if we want, we'll do a short break. Git reset undoes stuff. It can undo a commit, it can undo stuff we've added. I'm sure many of you have used git reset -- hard, and you know that it can be constructive or destructive and make stuff go away. And depending on the way we use git reset, it can get rid of stuff in our working directory, stuff we've added in the staging index, Anna and Chad, which is what you guys just did. And for a while, this was like how you had to do it, and then once they added restore to get that sort of been a recommendation. And you can also modify commits, and that's kind of where we're going next, in fact. And let me just check in and see if folks have any other questions or if there's other things on people's minds. Cool. And is this kind of helpful, like digging into this? I know that I threw a lot of code out there and like we're moving a bit slow, but just kind of like talking through the behavior of Git, because I know we're all kind of at like different experience points. So I just love a little feedback if this is helpful in getting more comfortable with the tool. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was, I've done some of this. I think it was helpful though. I think like as we move forward with some of these commands, I think like I'll blink and there's several commands that are ran and I kind of fall behind like immediately. So I think like when we walk through the rest, maybe when some of this material might be newer, if we can just have some little more brief pauses when running the command so we can kind of follow along a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for giving me that feedback, because I don't always know if I'm throwing too many commands out there. Why don't we've been at it for almost an hour. Why don't we take 10? And then when we come back, we're gonna use git reset soft. We're gonna add the python.env directory. We're going to accidentally add the .env file with our API key and commit it. And we're going to undo that, and we're going to make a backup branch along the way. So in case I screw something up, the backup branch has all that work. And we're going to look at that with git graph and stuff as we do it. So that's kind of the plan for the next one. And again, I just wanted to choose like a couple workflows that I think happen all the time, because once you kind of start to get a couple techniques down, you kind of get to build up your repertoire. And once you all start working with more feature branches, I know we've done some of it, but with the group project, it'll be kind of like to the next level. And these are a lot of the common things that pop up. So thank you very much, everyone. Let me go ahead and pause the recording. Before we kind of move on to the next scenario where we commit something that we want to undo without losing code, I just want to check in and ask how people are feeling about the idea of like these 3 zones that Git puts stuff in: the working directory, the staging index or the staging directory, and then our commits, the repository, the most recent commit. Because I think that can be potentially one of the trickier things to start getting comfortable with. And that's kind of like, I think, the key that like unlocks a lot of getting like kind of growing those Git skills. So I'm just curious, kind of like, is that something that you all feel like, yeah, Adam, I got it, I'm good, or more like, hey, it's cool, I'm kind of still wrapping my head around it, or somewhere in the middle? Good. I see a couple thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. Cool. I'm gonna take that everyone's feeling like, yeah, Adam, I got this. We're good. Let's roll. And that's awesome. So our next step here is we're gonna add this next feature of the using python.env to grab stuff from an environment variable. Before that, let's go ahead and make sure that our working directory is clean, that we've committed everything we want, there's nothing we missed, and go ahead and push our code. Because I always want to push stuff up to GitHub. I think you all have heard me say this, but when I'm working, I make commits like every 2 lines of code. I do not recommend doing work in huge chunks like this. This is really for the purposes of this exercise today. So I run git status after like every single command. And there was a foo.txt that was floating around from an example. So I'm just going to delete that. So all of you should be at the point where if you run git status, whether you're on the main branch or a branch named like initial setup or something else is fine. I meant to do this on a different branch. I apologize, but we're about to make a new branch. We're about to branch off of our branch, so that'll bring us all back onto the same branch. So you're set. So is everyone seeing, I'm on a branch, working directory is clean, there's nothing in there, there's nothing staged, and it says like ahead of origin by 1 commit if you haven't pushed yet. And if anyone's not in that state, please let me know. Cool. So let's go ahead and push. If you're not on the main branch, you'll get that message that says, hey, the remote origin GitHub doesn't have this branch yet because we just created it on our local Git, and you need to use, git push -- set upstream. That's the metaphor that Git uses for all these, origin / so on. We're gonna look at this stuff in GitHub a bit later, and if there's time, maybe do a pull request or two. So don't worry too much about that piece right now. The only other thing I want to check in on with folks to make sure that we're all in the same spot is that you're in your backend directory where app.py is, and that your virtual environment is activated as we're about to install another dependency. Awesome. So I'm going to create a new branch. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to go to that Git graph, and we have, a grand total of 2 commits. There we go. Now, right, it's if you click on, I think it's the message, that's where we get all the data. Let's create a new branch and see what Git graph shows us. This git checkout command is how we create a new branch, as you know. There's actually a new command coming along in Git for switching between branches, because checkout kind of does 1,000 things and they're trying to improve that. But it's not really standardized yet. So I would just recommend rolling with this unless you feel kind of comfortable getting up to speed on, I think it's git switch is maybe the name. Checkout -b, which is short for branch. And then we give the name of our branch. As you all start working in teams, you'll want to develop a branch naming convention. Often it's the name of the feature along with like a unique number that goes along with the GitHub issue or like the Trello card or something like that. An easy approach is front end versus back end, right? Back end branch of work, just start it with back end. There's other approaches as well. And just a very rough description of the feature we're about to implement, which is we're going to use the .env library. So let's go ahead and create this branch and check it out. So Git graph did a little bit of an update here. We're on a different branch, but it looks pretty much exactly the same. And if I do git log, I see the same commits, because each commit is a little node in a linked list that points back to the previous commit. And we're gonna dig in a little bit later to look at this special term head that's called a ref and see how Git uses that to sort of keep track of what is where with the branch. But this branch that we just created is basically exactly the same as the one we just had. So my virtual environment is activated. I am going to go ahead and install Python, the python.env directory. Excuse me, the python.env dependency. And I'm going to update my requirements.txt using the command line pipe operator. And now we get something interesting. Some uncommitted changes. In Git graph, I could look at my different branches. The branch we were just on, it does show the uncommitted changes, which I guess makes sense because when a change is uncommitted, oh no, it's because if you go here, there we go. No, it's still there. It makes sense if a change is uncommitted, it's not on any branch. Right? And even when a change is staged, it's not on a branch yet. Only when we make a commit does that commit then belong to a branch. And so we have these unstaged changes. I like to use the command line tool cat, which just prints out the contents of a file to make sure that when I'm doing stuff on the command line, it does what I think it does. And I see python.env in my requirements.txt. I could do code requirements.txt as well to open it up in VS Code. And if I do a little command F, I've got my .env there. So let's create a .env file. And we're going to put our environment variables in there. And I think it was Sean, I think maybe you were getting on this step. And if there's a typo in the, it's possible there's a typo in the code that I put up in it. So I apologize. We'll see. It's not uncommon to have an environment variable that basically says, is this program running on your local computer software engineer in the test QA environment or in the live production environment? Because things like Flask's debug mode in the real world, we don't want that running in the production environment. And it's not uncommon for those environment variables to just sort of have like env in the name. There's a couple different ways to do it, but this is not an uncommon one. And we're just going to make up an API key. We're not actually going to use it right now. Just so it's there to illustrate the point. And now we should have a .env directory in our backend directory, a .env file. I'm sorry, in our backend directory. And I will go ahead and close out all the things that we don't need. And let's go ahead and modify app py accordingly. So we're going to import from Python standard library, the OS library. And then we're going to import from the .env module that we just installed, the load.env function. And this reads the contents of that .env file and basically loads them in as like shell environment variables that we can use the OS Python standard library to access. And I'm going to add some print statements because I love print statements to confirm that I don't make typos and that everything is working the way I think. I'm going to copy this line of code and just change this to name of the other environment variable. I'll leave this up here for a minute and the next step is to run the app to make sure I don't have any typos. It's running. Right over here, I see printed dev and XYZ123, which is what I want to see. So let me just pause and see if folks have any questions here. Or if there is a point of confusion or something I may have inadvertently missed. Cool. Now all the way down here where it's app.run, we're going to modify this to use that Flask env environment variable. I do recommend for simplicity, just copying and pasting this code over. This is a common strategy you'll see as well. There's a lot of different ways to do it. One nice thing about this approach is when we're running in dev mode, there might be other stuff we want to make different, and doing it this way with this if statement makes that easy because we can just add more stuff. Right, so now we're not directly using the environment variable right here on this line with app.run to determine if we're in debug mode or not. But we're indirectly using it because we're using it with this if statement and this conditional, the flip bar is debug enabled constant. And if I kill and restart my server, fingers crossed it starts up again. And I can see that the debugger's active. Now we're going to start to get to the good stuff with Git. And I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions or anything.
Just one quick question. The Flask env and then the secret API key, those are totally arbitrary. Is that correct?
Almost correct. My secret API key. Do you mean the name of the environment variables or the values that I'm giving to them?
The value that you're giving to the secret API.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're not using my secret API key at all. I could have left this out. I just honestly put it in there just to help illustrate the point of that this is something we don't want to check into version control. You know, that one honestly is not needed at all. This one, you know, obviously what does matter here is our code now has some logic that's expecting an environment variable with a certain name to exist and it to have certain values like dev or prod or something else. So if the .env file doesn't match that, then our code will become unhappy and break, or it will not work correctly. So we can name it all whatever we want, but it has to be in sync. These naming conventions are pretty standard, and you'll see dev and prod. So I would kind of recommend following that pattern. Yeah, no, great question. Any other questions or things on people's minds?
I think like when I do the from.env import load.env, I think my server broke. It's like saying invalid syntax.
I would say it honestly doesn't impact this particular exercise because we're gonna just be working with Gits. Normally I would say let's take a look and just fix the syntax there, but since it doesn't matter at the moment, and I think that's okay. And in fact, you can circle. I would say let's circle back to that one.
All right, that's cool.
Yeah, if you wanna though, if you can maybe throw like the error message in the chat, myself or another student might be able to spot something. Usually once, you know, you get 2 or 3 sets of eyes on something, it's just way easier to spot stuff. Especially if it's giving a syntax error message, that's a pretty good sign. There's probably just something that, you know, it's like we've been looking at the code too long. So I'm gonna go ahead and do git add, and we're gonna add all this stuff. And obviously the thing that we don't want to do here in reality is add this .env file into version control. And again, we're doing this for learning purposes. And again, I'd actually recommend starting to get in the habit of when you use git add, do it for specific files. Because I think it makes workflows easier and avoids potential issues in the long run. So if I type git status now, we've got all this stuff. If I type git log, I can see my two previous commits. Let's go ahead and commit with the little commit message, and I'm just going to say added Python .env using for debug mode. Oh, Robert, and please do throw that error message in Slack or Zoom. Because probably there might be a quick fix that we can spot. Let me go ahead and hit enter on this commit message. And it would help if I clicked in VS Code. And now if I type git log, I see my new commit there. And Brian, I missed your message in the chat earlier about having permissions to add a branch. Did that get sorted, or was there an issue that you ran into?
I'm able to add a branch fine on my machine. I just didn't know if you wanted us to be pushing things up to the repository.
You should be working on a repo that you created in your own GitHub account for this.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Otherwise, 100%. And I appreciate you asking and checking in about that. Totally. Yeah, for this and for tomorrow's exercise, like for today, each of you should have your own repo. For tomorrow, each team will have their own repo. So now we've gone ahead and we've made this commit, and we realize, oh shoot, I've got the .env directory in there. Maybe in the code review, maybe at another point. If I go to git graph and I play around with this a little bit, now there's a little bit of a difference between these two branches. And now our task is we want to undo this. I don't want to get rid of the good work that I just did with that nice conditional logic and .env and requirements txt. But I do want to get the .env out of my commit. And thankfully, I haven't pushed it up to GitHub yet. And that makes this a little bit easier. So we're going to use the git reset command. As I briefly mentioned, there's like 3 different kinds of git reset. Git reset soft, git reset mixed, which might have been Anna, what you and Chad were using. And frankly is the one I tend to avoid a bit because I get a little confused by it, and git reset hard, which is the one that's a little dangerous and destructive because you can like destroy commits and stuff like this. So what git reset soft will do is uncommit our most recent commit without deleting the code. It's going to move that commit from from the commits in the repo, from the commit tree back to the staged, I believe it's the staged code and not the working index, and we'll see exactly what in a moment. And to do this though, we need to have it point just a little bit backwards to the prior commit. And this is the commit we want to reset. And I could copy this whole commit hash. Excuse me, actually, to explain that a bit better, what we're using git reset to do is with these 3 commits, and let me go ahead and get rid of main from here. I want to move back in time to the previous commit, right? I've got the commit I just made. That is the head of the branch. And then the one right before it. And we want reset to uncommit the one we just made and go back 1 to the one before it. And there's 2 ways to do this, right? If I want to tell git reset, hey, this other commit go back to this one, move this one ahead of it into staged. I could copy the commit hash. And I could do git reset soft and don't run this command, just as an example. I could do that. I'm not going to run this. I don't, in general, recommend you do it this way, though there are times where if you need to go way back, it makes sense, and that's the great thing about git commit hashes. What we can do is we can use this cool ref called head and move backwards. I can tell git head is our most recent commit here. Reset one commit back. Reset two commits back. Or if we had more commits, reset three commits back. Right? Head tilde and the number of commits that we want to move backwards. And I don't want to run this yet because I want to talk about this just a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about head and what it is. And I'm kind of lay it out over here, but let's walk through it. So we'll run this command in a little bit. So every commit in Git has a commit hash, which we're seeing, and we can see in the message here. Git creates this for us. It's a unique ID. Git has some sort of hashing function that it used to make sure that it's unique and it represents the changes on that commit. Not just potentially for one file, but it could be for a whole bunch of files, right? Whatever is in that commit. Maybe I change one line of code in one file, another line of code in another. It's all there. And in fact, if I go to, I'm going to very quickly just go to the repo that I was working with just a little bit. We can do all sorts of interesting things. I can go look at a branch. It tells me I'm 2 commits ahead of main. Over here where it says 3 commits, I can see the commit history. I see a little bit of the commit hash over here. If I click on view commit details, I have the full commit hash in this URL in GitHub, which is awesome. By the way, if I want to share this with someone else, whenever you're looking at code in GitHub, well, now it's in comment mode. So this is a great way as a team to leave comments, but you can also share a specific line of code this way. And we can see the diff on this commit versus main. If I wanted to, I could look at the whole repo at this point in time, which is a bit less interesting for this repo because there's not a lot there. But if we go to one of the other ones, like maybe the Django School API that has 39 commits, it starts to get a bit more interesting because if, say, we want to see this specific part of our code, I can see the whole repo at the specific point when that commit was made. And again, I can also look at the details of that commit, which stretches across a whole bunch of different files, which is not necessarily uncommon, right? It depends on what you're doing and how you're kind of organizing your work and stuff. So exploring code and commits and stuff in GitHub is incredibly powerful. And I'll get more into that later if we can. So that's, a commit hash. And let me actually move the browser back where it belongs. But what is this thing head? So head is what's called a ref or a reference in GitHub. And it's basically a variable pointing to the most recent commit hash on our current branch. Everything in Git is stored in the .git directory. And actually, please go ahead and navigate up one directory into the root directory for our project, where there should be a backend and a front end directory. And if you do ls -a, there should be a .git directory. I'm not going to go too deep into the .git directory, but there's actually a couple things that are really cool to see that are not that deep below the surface. We may have seen some of this, but I figured it's a good time for a review. So first rule of thumb, you're not really meant to directly touch this directory. Commands like git remote, I think that Sean was asking about earlier, some other commands modify things inside the .git directory. For almost everything, we're not meant to directly modify files in here. We're meant to use the git command line tool if we need to change config settings or other stuff. This is where our whole local repo is. And Git basically uses a whole bunch of files to store all this stuff in sort of its own version of a database, right? You know, with Postgres, somewhere on our computer, there's a bunch of files with all that data. Git does it with text files in a dramatically simpler way. So let's go navigate. So with that word of warning, let's go ahead and navigate in there. If you ever find yourself wanting to or feeling like you need to modify or say delete the .git directory to solve a problem, that's a good sign that you should ask for help and talk to some other people, because there's almost nothing you need to do where that's a necessary step, because like your worst case is you delete a branch and you start a new branch or something like that. Let's see what's inside here. And let me pause and see if folks have any questions about anything. Yeah, Matt, no, it's exciting. We get to go under the hood, and there's like a little danger. It's like in the movie, and like the hacker, you know, it's hacking into the system and all that good stuff. I will say the good news here is, you know, if I pushed all my code to GitHub and I do, for whatever reason, end up screwing something up inside the .git directory, I just delete it and clone the repo again. And that's the beauty of GitHub and having it stored in multiple places, that even that is not the end of the world. More so, my warning was, you're probably causing yourself more pain and suffering than you need to if that's the road that you're going down and messing with .git. Like that's usually as a junior dev when you'd want to get a senior engineer to help or something. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. Since we're talking about head, we see that there as maybe a file or directory. There's also config. If I just very quickly look at config, this is where all that stuff lives, right? When we're changing the remote origin and all these things, it actually lives in this config directory. And again, that's why Git kind of wants us to use the tool so that we don't have to worry about a typo or a space in the wrong spot, like modifying this directory and like breaking the whole thing. But it's this head directory that I'm interested in. And the cat command prints out the contents of a file. And it looks like head is a file. And in fact, if I really wanted to, I could do code head and look at it in VS Code. Again, I'm about to close this because we're really not meant to touch this. And that's one of the nice things about using the cat command, is I can see what's in a file without accidentally modifying it. And this starts to get interesting. So if I look in here, I see this stuff about ref and refs. And I kind of know that's the word that Git uses for like a variable that refers to a commit hash. And I know that the head is, you know, the commit, the most recent commit on a branch. And I see my branch name in here. So this is starting to get interesting. And there's also a directory named refs. So now, I don't know about you guys, but like I get a little excited about this stuff. I'm like, ooh, like we might be able to see how this works. And if I look in here, I see heads, remotes, tags, and now I'm really curious. And if I look inside, say, refs remotes, I see origin. And if I cat that out, oh, it's a directory. So let's do ls refs remotes origin. Right, a lot of interesting things. Let's maybe stick with refs and heads since that's our main interest. So if I do ls space refs / heads, and again, I really encourage you all to use the tab key to autocomplete. I don't type this stuff out by hand because I make typos. And it's faster this way. Now I'm getting interested. It looks like we have some files here that are heads for different branches. And if I do ls refs heads, my current branch, there's yet another thing in there. Maybe, is it a file? It is. So inside this refs directory is a directory for each of our branches. And inside there is a file that has the commit hash of the most recent commit. And so that's kind of where Git stores all this stuff. And this is, we're not going to go that much deeper under the hood, but I think this part is really cool. That all this power and magic of Git and these branches and things, it's really just a bunch of text files and IDs. And each branch gets its own file for a head. And whenever we make a new commit, whatever that commit hash is, gets stuck in there. So I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions or are curious about stuff, if this is review or new information or just what's on people's minds. Are folks feeling pretty kind of pretty comfortable with this, kind of like digging into this piece?
I guess I just don't, why do we need to, like, what's the point of that again?
Yeah, it's a great question. Going all the way back to this command that we're about to run. If I scroll up, we're gonna run it in a minute, but we're gonna run this command git reset dash dash soft head tilde1. I don't really need to know where this stuff lives in the .git directory, but once I start running commands that change commits where I potentially am doing something destructive, especially as you all start merging branches and having team branches where it's not just you working on it. You know, if I make a mistake and like destroy a commit with a bunch of work, that would really suck. And so with any of these commands where like we're changing something that's already committed, we really kind of need to be careful and understand exactly what we're doing. And so the really important piece here is just understanding what head is, that it points to the most recent commit hash and this tilde -1. The under the hood stuff is less relevant. I will say though, like Git is not going anywhere. You all will be using it, excuse me, for quite a while. And I think there's value in seeing a little bit of how it works and understanding how it's implemented as you kind of like get deeper into that journey. Big picture, like Git is like not the most important thing to kind of have this like total mastery of. But you know, big picture, like what people pay us for is knowing how stuff works. So for example, like the Python language or the JavaScript language, like whichever language you all interview in, that's something where you really do kind of want to start learning more about the internals of that language. And your goal really is like expertise and mastery, right? Because otherwise, like that's the value add of a software engineer. And so as you kind of grow to like a mid-level senior engineer, this deeper Git knowledge, I think starts to add to that. So hopefully this just kind of like sets the stage as like when you guys start circling back to this, that you can pick this up. Coming back to the technique at hand though, you're absolutely right. I don't need to know how the internals of Git work in order to use this git reset soft command. And if I navigate back to my main project directory, so I'm in the Git workshop directory, and let's go into the backend directory. And just to recap and refresh where we're at, we made a commit. And that commit had .env file in it, and we want to get rid of it. So again, whenever you're messing with something code that's committed, like be very careful and deliberate. And if you don't know what the command that you're about to run does, don't run that command, especially on a team branch like main or dev or prod. If it's my own branch, you know, the worst case is like I lose work. If it's the team branch on the group project, that's a lot more frustrating. So actually, because this code is committed, what's the easiest, quickest way to make a backup in case I do make a mistake?
Cloning.
Good idea. We could clone the whole repo. We can do something even simpler. You're on the right path though, that since the code is committed in Git, we can use Git. We can make a new branch. And we can call it just backup.env. Because now when I go back to this other branch and change stuff, backup.env is separate, right? Whatever I do on the other branch will not affect this one. Like I could destroy a ton of commits on the other branch and it shouldn't affect this one unless I really go deep into Git stuff. There's a super useful Git shortcut, which is Git checkout space dash. And that lets me jump to the last branch that I was on. And that as you start using different branches more and more, is really useful. And I do admit, I don't like actually that my backup branch sounds almost the same as my backend branch. If I was to do this again, I would name it differently because that's just another easy mistake to make. But so now I'm back on the backend -use -.env branch. And we have this other branch with my code backed up. So now I can run this command with a lot of confidence. I know what head is. I know that we are uncommitting the most recent commit, but not deleting it. And moving the head of this branch back to the previous commit. And I know I have another branch where that work will still be committed in case I do something wrong. So please do go ahead and run this command. And now if you type git status, we should see that we have all these changes to be committed. And if we look over here in this source control tab, we can see this there as well. And now, in fact, we can use the git restore stage command that we were looking at earlier, specifically to remove the .env file from our staged changes. And again, there's not a lot of complexity to this workflow, but this is a safe way to do this, right? Because the thing about like errors and mistakes is no one ever means to make one, and we can never predict when we're going to. So the more you can bake safety into your workflow, especially for this Git stuff where like you can lose code, it's really valuable. So now I've got my untracked file. I've got these changes to be committed. And the next step is to just go ahead and commit. And we can just say added .env to class app or whatever we want to say. And let me just pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and push. And I get the set upstream message because this branch doesn't exist yet on GitHub. And if I look at Git graph now, if I click to show all my branches, there should now actually be 3 of them. There's my backup branch, and there's the backend sort of feature branch where I did the work. And we can see that change, right? Because the backup branch is the one we don't care about now that has the .env in there. It's a commit behind. This other one we added another commit to, and it's a commit ahead. We can see that the main branch actually stops here because we haven't merged any of this stuff onto the main branch yet. And I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions or are curious about things.
Yeah, I don't have that branch splitting off in my Git graph.
Go up here to this menu, and I got a little confused by this as well. You can kind of select and deselect checkboxes. Do you have 3 different branches, whatever they're named, like one and the one we were doing this work on and the backup?
Okay, I see now. I just didn't make the backup .env.
Got it. Yeah, well, then you would just have the 2, and I'm not sure if you would see that there. So making the backup branch, you don't have to. But I know from like chatting with many of you that there have been times where, again, this Git stuff is tricky and you've lost work. And when you're doing this like 4 to 5 hours a day for weeks at a time, mistakes are inevitable. So I really recommend like building your own Git workflow that you bake some safety into. And the more and more you get comfortable with it, then the less you need to do some of those things. It's also just, I think, good practice and kind of thinking about Git and how to like leverage it and use it effectively. Those were really the major changes I wanted to go through. The other scenario is I've committed code and I pushed it and using a force push to overwrite the branch. There is a feature I want to show, I think just very briefly, and then this might be a good point for questions and a break. And it's something called Git Stash. And go ahead and check out the main branch or whatever the name of the first branch that you created is. And I'm not sure why it's giving me all these squigglies at the moment, and that's okay. And let's just add a print statement just right at the top of the code. Let's say for the sake of argument, I didn't want to do this work on this branch. I actually meant to do this on another branch. Git has a very useful feature called Git Stash. So if I type Git Stash and hit enter, whatever was in my working directory that I have not added or committed, Git saves in a little list, like a little array of changes. And it tells me save working directory, yada, yada, yada. If I do Git stash dash dash help, I can see there's a bunch of commands here. Git stash list is the most interesting. You can have a bunch of things in the stash and refer to them based on their ID. This one is 0. But most of the time you only need to stash one thing. And so go ahead and check out another branch. And maybe use this dash feature if you haven't. And now, because that stash it's actually really kind of like a little stack. Going way back to data structures, the command is git stash pop. And it's gone ahead and added in my change. If I do git status, and if I type git diff to look at the difference between what's in my working directory and the most recent commit to make sure something hasn't snuck in, I see that there's just that print statement. So especially as you start working in teams, you might find that you started work on like the dev or the main branch that you actually want on your feature branch or something like that. And Git Stash is just like an incredibly useful tool. One other useful feature I do want to show is you can search through your code base with something called git grep. So if I want to find everywhere in my code base where I have the string print, I can use this command git grep print. And the nice thing about this is everything that we list in a .git ignore file, Git ignores. So things like npm modules and the Python virtual environment directory. You can also do this in VS Code with Control Shift F or Command Shift F for a global search. And if you prefer that, that can work quite well as well. But the git grep is super handy. Those are kind of the big ones. I think, the only other thing is, I think most of you have ZSH set up with your shell, which I think sets up this branch auto completion. But as you start to have more branches, being able to hit tab to get a list of names and commits of branches is incredibly useful. And there is a script for that I can share with folks if you don't have that implemented. Those are really kind of the big things that I kind of wanted to cover. And just to kind of recap here, we've got the working directory, the staging directory head. Git restore stage is safe. Git reset soft, we have to be careful with, but it's safe. Git reset hard, we haven't looked at, but we have to be much more careful with. And maybe what we'll do is we'll look at that a bit after the break for like a workflow with that. But really kind of the plan for tomorrow then is to start working in groups on different branches and merging code and coordinating. And in that vein, I do want to show, actually, before I kind of show merging the pull requests for this code that we were just writing, let me just pause and see if folks have questions about anything. Cool. So let me go ahead and actually, I think I did my work. I created a branch for myself as well. Actually, this is a good, I know that many of you have done this. Some of you maybe have not or done less, but we can explore a little bit of GitHub's feature set for working with branches. There's this very useful button that pops up when a change to a branch happens. Compare and pull request. I can click on this and it will create a pull request with this branch against the main branch. The other way to do that is if I go to this pull requests tab and I hit new pull request. And the important thing to know about a pull request is it doesn't change anything. It's perfectly safe. It's when you like approve a pull request that a merge actually happens. Excuse me. So creating a pull request, the base is the branch we're bringing the changes onto. Once this is done, our main branch is going to have the code from our feature branch. The compare branch is the one that we have the work on that we want to add to main. Excuse me. We'll look a bit more at like dealing with conflicts tomorrow and more so how to avoid them. Here, we have no conflicts, which is great. So you could imagine another teammate has been working on another branch and they've got a pull request to merge to main, maybe for some front end code. And then you've got this one as well. And we have this very nice diff. And we can see that, nothing has changed. We could add a comment if we felt like we needed to, well, let me create the pull request. And here I would add a description of, of what we did and just hit create pull request. Don't worry too much about the other options. There's a draft pull request and things like that. You can see the commits, which is very useful. If there's more than one commit, you can actually browse through them. And there's just a bunch of review tools that are helpful. Being able to have conversations here is where a huge part of code review happens. And then the files changed again is also very useful. And you can leave comments here and close and open and mark when you've reviewed something and review changes and do all the different things. And then, you would want a teammate to look at this code. I can't approve my own code, but someone else would be able to. And so now when I hit merge pull request, this is when git merge actually happens. And I know we've talked about git merge some, not a ton. And actually, so let me pause and see if folks have any questions, like what's going to happen when I hit merge pull request here. Our commits from our feature branch are going to be brought on to the main branch. Right. And my guess is that most of you guys like, yes, that I know that. And now I can see that it's merged. I have a really nice history, open, closed. As you work on this project as a team, using pull requests so that you can coordinate and describe what you're doing will make life a whole lot easier. And now if I go to my code on the main branch, if I look at this commit history, I see I've got this stuff. Right. And I think actually the last thing I will show, because I know this has been a common issue, though I think most of you have figured out how to address it at this point, is let's say I've merged that pull request. I'm just going to blow away these changes that I made from app.py. Let's go to my main branch. Let's say I do need to modify something on this main branch or do something on it. The reason you want to do pull requests and communicate amongst the team is because now that I've done that feature and it's been merged to main, when you work on your feature, you're going to want to pull down that version of main with those changes and branch off of that for your feature work. And you probably actually will be possibly multiple times a day on teams with like good workflows. Like when I worked at Reverb, you know, the whole engineering team of like 20 people was constantly pushing to main because they had amazing automated tests and deployment. So if I was working on a feature and went more than 2 days without pulling down the main branch onto my local repo and merging the main branch into my feature branch, when I made the pull request, there would be like a ton of conflicts that would take hours and hours to fix because so much work had happened. You guys aren't going to have that same level of velocity, but it's a really useful habit to just know when main has been updated, pull it down. If you're working on a feature, see if you can't like merge it in, because, you know, just like with debugging, one or two little changes, easy to deal with. If there's a merge conflict, easy to deal with. If you have like 5 files renamed, a directory moved, a class has been renamed, and all of that is in one merge conflict, that can be a huge headache that can easily like take an hour or more to deal with. And that's really what tomorrow is going to kind of be about in terms of practicing. You know, this was really kind of the bulk of what I wanted to get through today. We can certainly tackle some more stuff if there are particular things that folks are interested in. I know that like we have projects as well, so I want to be mindful of that. So I just want to pause and see if folks have questions about stuff, because I know I went over a couple things here. And how are we feeling like about like Git and starting to like make some more of these changes and starting to use like Git stash and maybe like move a bit more quickly between different branches? Cool. We should take a break. Are there things in particular that people would like to see or dig into after the break that we could just like dive into now? Because I think if there's like particular things, now could be a great time just to look at them. Otherwise, I would say this is just some time that you all can have for work time, and we'll get into the sort of like collaborative feature branch workflow stuff tomorrow. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and